We started our journey on Monday, the story that we divided into three parts. We're trying to look at how post-COVID commercial direction and morality might mix. And we started on Monday, for those of you who were in the session, with looking at the past and trying to make sense of what's facing us in terms of possible unemployment figures, the way the economy is going, and what we can expect by drawing on past experiences such as the last economic crash, and see what that has to teach us. Today, we've really excited to welcome Bongani to the mix and to tell us about the real theme that we're talking about this week, where we get into our theme is, if we looking at our structures, our staff costs, and our employment reality, can business and morality mix? Can you make good commercial decisions and still make good moral and ethical decisions that do not put the country in a worse position than it is already in? And we want to have a look at what these strategies will entail. And then we'll finish off on Friday with how to make those decisions with in an informed manner, and the power of data analytics. But without much further ado, I'm going to move ahead into the results of the poll that we took on Monday. And what we did was we combined it with a poll that we took early in the year, and we sent out a poll to our clients, a couple of surveys, should I say, to our clients, asking about how they would react to certain things such as staff costs, bonus payouts, increases, and all the costs associated with what is usually a company's biggest budgetary item. And we wanted to see, thinking back to April, people were reacting then. I know a lot of us thought it was going to be a short lockdown. We thought it was going to be over quite quickly. We sadly grew up very, very quickly to the reality of things. And a lot of our outlooks have changed as to how we will live our lives for the next year, at least, in very different circumstances. So we wanted to see how the reactions would be to what we sent out sort of beginning mid-lockdown, and how the reactions had changed. And the reactions were quite illuminating. So if I move on to the first slide, we just asked, at the beginning, it was all over the media about executives taking cuts to help get through the period. We know we already have a very high rates of executive pay in this country. It's not actually just a South African problem. It's become a global debate in all countries, where there is such a gap between executive pay and what we can call normal levels of pay. So we would have said, our question was, are you considering taking a reduction in guaranteed pay for that period? As you can see, in our April survey, which is the blue, there was quite a large number of companies, over 60%, saying that they would make no reduction or sacrifice. That's now dropped to close to 40%. So that's a 20% drop in a few months as the economic realities have started to fit in. And then you can see that across the rest, from 6 to 10%, 11 to 15% cut, 16 to 20% cut, and a 21 to 25% cut, that the percentages of who is going to be giving those cuts has grown. In case you are mathematically minded and try and add up all those amounts and don't get to 100, that's because in our April survey, there were amounts above the 21 to 25. But they are really negligible. This is where the majority of the participants sit. And as we can see, the numbers have changed significantly to say, we now realize where we are, we know what's ahead of us, and we've changed our outlook in terms of executive pay. At least that is what these figures are telling us. If we move on to the second question, are you considering a freeze on increases for 2020? Again, we can see from the April survey, which is blue, that number has more than doubled, that people are not going to be giving increases this year, that they have given a freeze on that. Very often we know from clients that is a reaction to actually trying to save positions. Whereas if even a CPI increase was granted, it would put large parts of a company in terms of staff in danger of being retrenched. So we see that number going up, and we see the number for our polls far lower for no and far lower for undecided as well. So it seems a lot of companies have now set their course, charted their course forward, and said that they are going to be going in a very conservative direction in terms of increases. Moving on to slide 3, where we move on to short-term incentives, or the annual bonus as it's more commonly known. What is happening there? A bit of confusion here, because some people have probably confused putting the STI scheme on hold with removing it. Hence, the bottom 2 answers might have a bit of overlap. But what we can see is that there's a greater prevalence of no STI schemes, which could be interpreted as the STI scheme has put on hold. But we can see, so that also shows us that for our poll, the STI scheme put on hold slightly lower than the figure in April. And the same goes for the STI continuing as is, where the figure for the September poll, is higher than the April poll, as well as the STI scheme on hold. The STI continues with lower values. That was actually higher in April. So what we've seen here as well is a movement towards more clarity. But why we also haven't seen an absolute collapse in terms of STIs and variable pay schemes is that, in light of the previous slide, where we said that there's not going to be many companies granting increases, that companies will be looking towards their variable bonus vehicles, which is more in their control and pays out if performance is achieved. They're going to look at those bonus vehicles to drive their recovery from the effects of COVID, which is less risky for them than raising salaries, which, as we all know, raises your fixed costs, your benefit contributions, etc., etc., etc. So that might be one reason why short-term bonuses are still in the mix. The quanta and the conditions for those bonuses will probably change to accommodate the actions needed for a recovery, as opposed to pre-COVID, where it was focused purely on increasing value and achieving certain goals. Moving on to the last slide, which is also in the variable pay stable, and that focuses on your long-term incentive schemes, which we define as anything longer than 3 years. Also, still in play. I think this is due to a lot of companies, especially listed companies, still unsure what to do with their schemes. We've seen some good economic growth in some countries. We've seen some countries have their stock markets rebound incredibly quickly following the economy coming out of lockdown. And we think a lot of companies are adopting a wait-and-see attitude, hoping that the same good sentiment will drive indicators which will lead to the value recovery of their schemes. But we also see that we have a higher percentage of no LTI scheme, which again could be construed as the LTI scheme has been put on hold, which is also higher for our September poll, if only marginally. But then we see that some companies are still continuing as is, or with lower values. And we have seen a larger percentage than in April putting new awards on hold. So all in all, presenting us a picture of companies which are trying to do the right things in some areas and be morally responsible in terms of holding back increases to bring down retrenchments, to bring down staff reductions. But on the other hand, still a bit unsure as to what the economic recovery is going to mean to certain of their bonus vehicles. So that was quite interesting to see that people have changed their shift and changed their viewpoint, and how that has changed since the days in which we thought we were going to open in 1 month. And with that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Ongani to take you through the meat of today's presentation, which I hope you'll find very interesting.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thanks, Craig. And welcome everybody again, and much appreciated for joining this session. I see a few familiar names and familiar faces. So as I continue, and Sean's presentation of the survey juxtaposes with the presentation that I'm going to take you through quite well. The discussion starts with the social contract that companies are having with basically both their employees and the society. And one would like to present this session and say, let's have a look at how the evolution of how companies report or how companies are held responsible by the different societies that they exist in. Can you guys still hear me? Am I still audible? It's so quiet in this room.
Yeah, we've still got you, Bo. Bo, could I just, if I could interrupt you,
Yes,
we discussed the other day whether you'd like to share your own slides. Are you happy that I keep driving, or would you like to share them on your own screen?
I think let's continue.
Super.
Let's continue, Craig. Yeah,
Perfect.
Let's take it from there. All right. So what I'm putting on the table for a discussion a little bit later when we get into that space is let's have a look at triple bottom line as a reporting tool for a lot of organizations, basically talking about how that has evolved the responsible corporate citizenship of our companies. So we have this 3-tier reporting scheme, which just means a lot of companies in terms of morality are now required to report on profit, the environment, and social and human capital aspects. But what that has happened as we proceed, Craig, is, if you just please, press tab on your side, thank you very much, is that we evolved that model, the triple bottom line reporting model, to what has now been called the 6 capabilities model, 6CM. So the 6 capabilities, as are being put on your screen, are now transposed on the 3 bottom line, triple bottom line methodology that we have used to report for companies. So we're looking at natural capability, financial capability, manufactured capability, social and relationship capability, human capital, and intellectual capability or capital. So these capitals, 6 of them have been put in place. If you would just press proceed on your side, Craig. We use a very good example of what has happened in the different industries and different markets, and the examples of cases would be if we have a look at Enron, BP, Volkswagen, and KPMG. These 3 companies, based on the cases that I think are available in the market for one to read on, is their experiences have created quite a lot of decreased trust with the social context within which they operate. And fundamentally, the reduction in trust could be written down to poor governance and lack of transparency. So this is now, if we go to the next slide, Craig, this now takes us to what has happened in COVID, or let's say COVID and post-COVID. There's a study that was done by Josh Bashan, the Josh Bashan Group in 2020, so around April this year. This study has now emphasized the top 4 issues that employees that sit on employees' minds as a result of COVID. And it took them this global crisis, this global epidemic, for employers to realize that if employees do not feel in their employment circles or in their employment space, if they do not feel supported, if they don't feel emotionally secure or even safe, they simply don't do their jobs or can't do their jobs. So the survey highlights, I think, the 4 issues which will actually underpin the bigger part of this presentation. Is financial security, there we go. Financial security, health and well-being, family and productivity and work. These are the top 4 issues that employers have now picked up as top 4 in minds of their employees. Next slide for me. So how does this shape our thinking as companies when we speak about what is it that we should do to try and balance morality and recovery from the Black Swan event, which is COVID. The approach that I will be taking you through as one of the resilience creating factors of organizations is basically an approach that is anchored on a methodology by Porter and Kramer. The methodology is called CSV, Creating Shared Value. Basically, it talks about how societal and economic progress are intertwined. It's also very important, colleagues, to mention that CSV as our underpinning model or our foregrounding model recognizes that a lot of social harms and weaknesses often create internal costs within the companies. But important to make here is that those internal costs do not necessarily rise as a result of these societal harms. The reason why they don't necessarily create an increase or a rise is basically because organizations are quite dynamic creatures. So an organization can, in its mitigation, introduce new technologies, new operating models, which will then be the crux of today's discussion, and new management approaches. So this is basically the foregrounding to what we would then interpret and put forward as 21st century as the new Agile operating model. Next slide, sir. Cool. Colleagues, I'm going to take some time on this slide because it is a very good foreground for us. What we've done in here is had a look at a lot of definitions of what an operating model is, but more specifically, what an Agile operating model. You're going to hear me throughout this presentation refer to TOM or OM. TOM would refer to targeted operating model, and then OM is operating model. The fundamental difference between the two is a targeted operating model is an operating model that we look to in the future as we forecast an organization. An operating model is therefore how you define, how you deliver your services to your clients in the status quo. Let's have a look at the definition, which I very much like, that tries to simplify what an operating model is. Blueprint of an organization's vision that aligns operating capabilities and strategic objectives. It provides an overview of an organization's core capabilities, internal factors and external drivers, strategic and operational levers, and organizational and functional structure, technology and information resources of a company. So that is basically an operating model. If you look at the triangle that sits before you, at the top of that triangle, you'd have the vision and the strategy of an organization, which is basically a founding statement. And that's where you would ordinarily have what we would then term a business model. I'm going to open up a discussion, and please use the chat box to raise any comments that we can follow up a little bit later as we talk. There's a fundamental flaw that is happening in different companies and in academia, where the words business model and operating model are used interchangeably. And I call that a fundamental flaw because these models are different and they do different things for the company. A business model would basically sit at the top of that pyramid, which is where you would define your vision and the strategy and what the business does and why the business exists. And then as you move down, you would then define an operating model. In my next slide, it will become even clearer how we define agility as part of an operating model. So an operating model is therefore a translation of your business model into how do we deliver our services, through what channels do we deliver the very same services, and specifically to whom. In other words, what clients or customers have we defined for ourselves as a business. Now, it is absolutely imperative that one understands that all these facets of an organization, what creates agility is not that the elements exist, but it's how the elements come together and how they integrate in creating agility for an organization. I think most of us in this call would probably remember an old adage that says structure follows strategy. At 21st century, we believe that when you operationalize that philosophy or that old adage, is you would even say, even before structure, you have an operating model. So in other words, in between your strategy and your structure is your operating model. Next slide, my brother. Now, I'm very passionate about this slide before you colleagues because it is a very strong foreground to our Agile operating model in an attempt to assist our clients creating resilience against any black swan event. As the previous slide indicated to yourselves, you'd see that at the top of that slide, we've got strategic drivers, which is where strategy and heritage sit. On the right, that's where you have your business model. That's basically where you define the what, the vision, your culture, your key differentiators, etc. That's where business modeling sits. You then go to the less sexy part of the business when you then go into the operating model, because this is now where, once you've defined your business model, you then ask yourself the questions, I've defined what I do as a business, but how am I going to do that? And what channels am I going to do or use to deliver the very same services? And I'm talking both internally deliver to yourself and deliver to your clients and customers. And then it is only then that you can start talking the architecture of an organization, meaning organizational design, structure, policies, processes, and technology. So what am I saying here? I'm saying an operating model serves as a critical and vital link to a company's strategy and its organizational architecture. Next slide. Or just press enter there. Thank you. If you could stop there for a moment. What I've just added there is the Agile operating model, and I've put the word in there that is pastel. Most of the people in this room, and I'm preaching to the converted, understand what pastel is. It's a business acronym that has taken different shapes over the years. Other people in this room would know it as steeple or pastel. So this is basically where an organization interfaces with its environment to basically position itself as a winning organization or a successful company. So that constant interaction with your environment, in theory, has now been summarized into that acronym of PASTEL, which is the political environment, the economic environment, the social environment, the technological environment, and the environmental factors that affect the environment, that affect your company, and then finally legal. But what has happened to move that acronym further, because all theories evolve, is an introduction of the last letter, which is E, standing for ethics. So it is now PASTEL with an E at the end. So that E is basically the crux of today's discussion, where we're saying organizational morality has now been brought to the fore as the social contract between companies and the societies within which they operate is getting tested. And this is now how organizations move forward. And then the slide that Craig has put up for us, thank you for that, takes us into the 21st century Agile operating model. Colleagues, earlier on, I tried to give you a distinction between a business model and an operating model. And what would capture here is an understanding that a business model without an operating model is basically a recipe for failure, because organizations would fail if they do not have a synergy between the two. So if you look at the puzzle that you see in front of you, and this theme of puzzle is going to follow through the rest of my presentation. This Agile operating model, which basically depends fundamentally, or the critical factor of agility, is how quickly an organization can make decisions in responding to whatever changes are happening in the pastel environment. So if you are faced with a black swan event as an organization, and let's use COVID as that black swan event, what is it that you can tweak in your operating model, and you can do it so quickly that you follow the very same speed of the disruption that the organization is faced with? It is therefore this agility of the operating model that we speak to today. Now, once you've put together, now let's talk about the cascaded effect of the operating model. The strategy I've spoken about is the top of the pyramid, which then translates into your business model. And then that business model moves us into the Agile operating model. An operating model gets further operationalized in an organization through different organizations defining value chains, but not only that, but also defining service delivery models. So these service delivery models are very much in line with your defined operating model. So each element of core business could potentially have its own SDM, which is a service delivery model, or your support business, or even your enabling part of your business could also have uniquely defined service delivery models. Perhaps a good example is pertinent right now. That example would be if most of the people in this room are human capital specialists, you'd understand that your human resources department as an enabler or a support division to core business, how that organization or how that unit is structured depends very much on the service delivery model that you have put in place. Example, you can either centralize your human capital services, decentralize your human capital services, or go through another model that is now commonly known as a business partnering model. So those are all different types of service delivery models, which then give us a structure or an architecture. Next slide. Colleagues, I'm going to also sit on this slide just for a few minutes or a minute or two. This is the 21st century Agile operating model canvas. And I indicated in my previous slide that what we will be talking to here is using the analogy of putting together this puzzle. And as you put together this puzzle, you then understand what critical elements of this puzzle and how moving and changing these elements of a puzzle affects your business. Now, Craig, if you could point to the right of the canvas, that's where you would have the steering and slightly to the middle, yeah, the steering and enabling business processes of an organization. And then if you, the extreme left of the same canvas, you'd have your core business processes. And then right in the heart of that canvas, that's where you'd have the operating units, or essentially your core business. And at the bottom, these are the governance element of your operating model. And then at the top of the canvas, it's basically where we would help an organization define its distribution channels, its market segmentation, and also its customer segmentation. Now, what has been put up on the screen already as part of the puzzle framework is an understanding that when we speak about putting together an operating model, we look at customer segmentation when we look at markets that are either existing or new markets for that business. And then where the operating model will need to be tweaked when you review your organization at a customer segmentation level is looking at your segmentation, you're looking at your distribution channel, and you're looking at your customers. Next step. Craig. Thank you, sir. Then the next step is the yellow, or you're moving a little bit too fast for me, sir. Thank you, sir. Then the step where we're at now is yellow, if I'm not colorblind. This is where we're talking technology, or even another enabling part of your business, and changes in technology, either in the pastel environment or in your business, would invariably affect the steering part of your business. It would also affect the core business of your service delivery, and then how you create demand. So again here, how you implement this canvas in your own internal space is making sure that the agility of the operating model is understanding your pastel environment. One of the critical issues in our pastel when we emphasize the technological space is knowing what COVID has done with regards to moving the fourth industrial revolution in quantum leaps forward. So you would need to understand how that is affecting your business, both on the steering side of the business, on how you deliver your services on the core side to your customers, and how you create this demand. Next one. And then the puzzle continues, colleagues, where we're now talking the blue element. Again, here, this is the enabling or the support side of your business. Having a look at your pastel environment, what would you change if there's movement with regards to the legislative environment? We've got different examples. Some of you who work in the labor brokering space would remember the changes that happened in South Africa when the legislation was changed. So Agile organizations understood how that was going to affect them, but more importantly, which elements of their operating model is a legislative change. How is that going to change how you deliver your businesses? In other words, how you insource or outsource your internal capabilities. So this is basically how you meet your demand, how you customize your product or even services, and how internally you deliver services to yourself through your human capital. Next one, sir. Fundamentally as well is how you then meet and how you deal with your supply and your demand, the planning of that, and importantly, within your core business, what business processes are changing as a result of you responding to a situation that is either within your control or out of your control in your pastel environment. So this puzzle, as Craig, you continue for me, what happens is we have this canvas that has a look at your entire operating model and the various aspects of the canvas as we've just shown to you, that every element of this puzzle has a specific impact or an area of impact in your business. It is also fundamentally interesting that as we go to the next slide, Craig, it's also fundamentally interesting that when you look at the five rings, the concentric rings in that slide, they basically indicate all the elements of the Agile operating model. There is one singular characteristic that differentiates an ordinary operating model and an Agile one, and that is short planning cycles that are integrated and interconnected, but most importantly, that are data-driven. So where you see the cycles overlapping, this is where we are saying break down the silos, make sure that there is short planning cycles between the different elements of your operating model, and make sure that the decisions that you make in changing or adapting your operating model to your pastel are data-driven. So this is where, as you go into our third tier of this launch of our data analytics business, we make a strong emphasis to organization to use available local and international data to inform specific decisions. So if you have data that is usable at the fingertips of your decision makers within an entity, you stand a much better chance of surviving a black swan event or responding to a disruption in your pastel environment. Your speed to reaction to a black swan event depends on data being available and your planning cycles being reduced to the shortest possible available span that the business can take. Therefore, what are we saying in the next slide? What we are saying in this slide as an element of conclusion, colleagues, is developing an agile operating model for any business means the business is able to pivot from disruption, especially in times of economic crisis. You need to make sure that your operating model is so agile that it can respond, and you also understand which aspect of your operating model needs to pivot in response to the disruption. And also because, as you would have seen in my earlier slides, that an operating model comprises of quite a number of elements of your business. So it is absolutely important that as you develop and as you design your agile operating models, you understand that it's the interaction between the different aspects of your operating model that gives you agility. So thinking about them in silos doesn't make your operating model agile, but having them interconnected and integrated is what would give you agility, so that you very easily and quickly can go to a pain point which your business is suffering as a result of an external influence factor. Therefore, an agile operating model is what gives your business speed to market and speed of execution. It enables your business to adapt as quickly as possible to these different influences to your business ecosystem. And again, here I'm emphasizing organizations doing thorough data-driven pastel analysis. Thus, what are we saying? Our advice to our clients as they prepare for taking very serious decisions in a hostile environment or in a disturbed environment, we give advice that balancing morality and ensuring that your business survives a black swan event is that it's important that you deliver. It's very important that your business model is pegged against very proper pastel analysis, but also importantly that you assess the robustness and the agility of your operating model. You enhance, and I think I'm going to emphasize point number 3, you enhance the alignment between your organizational architecture and your operating model. So in other words, using available data analytics, you are able to understand which element of your operating model is affected by the pastel and thus change your architecture in compliance with response to that situation. 21st Century has therefore put together a team of very strong business analytics from our new business analytics business unit, the organizational design business unit, talent management business unit, and change management business unit. We have these teams that use very current and reliable data and tested approaches and methodologies in ensuring that we can assist our clients with building resilience from their standard, and finally to making sure that their operating models are at least in compliance with what the social contract that the company has with the society around which it delivers its services. That concludes my presentation, colleagues, for now, but I'm looking forward to a discussion of any aspect of the talk, starting from the survey data to the interesting elements of insulating your business against this black swan event that we're faced with. Thank you. Back to you, Craig.
Perfect. Thanks so much, both. I'm just going to stop sharing here, and I want to launch the poll while we get into the questions. But while I do that, Chris has asked a couple of questions in the chat box. The first one is there was a question around, surely nearly all businesses need to adopt the Agile operating model because of COVID. Would any be exempt?
Okay, sorry.
Would you like
Ask the question again, because I'm not seeing the chats on my screen. So
okay.
If you could just please ask the question, and or maybe Chris is here online. He can probably ask the question.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks, both. So what I'm asking is, in your opinion, are any businesses exempt from looking at the Agile or adopting an Agile operating model because of COVID? In other words, are some businesses immune, if I can call it that?
Chris, I would say, the reason we do not have dinosaurs right now is because they stopped evolving and the environment couldn't carry them anymore. So I would shy away from using the word any organization is immune, because if you have an environment that you exist in and you as a business are not responsive to the changes in your environment, it is almost a perfect recipe for extinction. So it's absolutely important that all businesses have a look at their operating models, but more importantly, build agility and resilience in their operating model that is fundamentally driven by data.
Perfect. I've got a second question to ask you. The E that's been added onto Pestle is a fairly new addition, should I call it, and COVID has propelled that forward quite quickly. What are the standards that you would suggest companies use in looking at that E as the add-on to Pestle?
Look, the country, and I think it's quite a pertinent issue, Craig, and thank you. Sorry, Chris, thank you so much for raising this question. All of us in this room are very much cognizant of the challenges that a lot of organizations have faced, specifically in this country, and I'm talking pre-COVID issues here. KPMG comes to mind as one very clear example that is available in the market as a case study of what happens in an organization, or in what happens if an organization relegates ethical compliance and good governance and proper accountability, relegates that to a level of strategic unimportance. You relatively see that level of deterioration, and this is where the trust between the entity and the society, or even its clientele, could be fundamentally shifted and broken even. And as they say in business, lost ground is unrecoverable in business. So you could do quite a lot of things to try and rebrand the company, but that could actually cause almost extinction in the company. So the variables that one would put forward here is ensuring that ethical leadership, overemphasis of business values, in other words, and ensuring that the values that you set up when you strategize and created the business are not just words, but are integrated in your strategic planning. And absolutely important is transparency and ethical conduct at all levels of your business, dealing with customers, dealing with the society that you operate within, and also making sure that the employees that work for you understand how this is linked to the brand, to performance, and to the other factors of company success.
Perfect. Thanks for that answer. I'm busy reading a comment by Nanette. Thanks for posting that, Nanette. If one selects no for question 3, question 4 is not applicable, but then it doesn't allow you to submit the survey. It will skew the data if we just select something for the sake of submitting. Any suggestions? I'm not sure that I do have any suggestions, to be honest.
Craig, maybe I can come in.
Yeah.
So what I would suggest, because I hit that problem as well, is that you just tick anything on question 4, but when we analyze the data, if question 3 was answered no, we will ignore question 4.
Yeah.
Else you can't submit.
Perfect, because that's what I was going to suggest. But if I could just perhaps ask if you put it, if you just click, if you have clicked no, just put it into across all levels. It'll just make it easier for us to strip it out. Thank you for raising it, Nanette. I was wondering why it was progress was a little bit slow on the poll. Are there any other questions while we are just completing the poll? Sean, do you want to perhaps come in while we are waiting any more questions?
No, I just want to say thanks to everybody for attending. And we'll wrap up on Friday with looking at how data can drive the decisions that we need to take. What we'll be sharing on Friday is to show you how a wrong decision in a certain restructuring or downsizing situation can really upset your position versus the market, and how going on gut feel or internal information only can often result in a decision that just is totally wrong if one had other information to hand. So we'll be going through a few case studies about that and showing you what is available in terms of data and how that can be properly used. So yes, well, thank you very much for joining us. We end with the news that we are being addressed by our president tonight at 8 o'clock.
Yep.
And I think everybody knows what that's about, or yeah, we shouldn't be too sure after previous addresses, but let's hope it's better news for the economy going forward and that we can start our recovery in earnest now. Yes, Craig, that's all from my side. Thank you very much, Bo, for that very, very insightful piece.
Thank you very much for attendee, for all the questions and interaction. We are available, I think, post this session or at the end of this session for any people that would like to remain and have, one-on-one or discussions with us.
Perfect. Then once again, thank you so much. The presentations will be distributed as they were last time, and please feel free to fire any questions back through that channel if you have any. And if I could just invite you to just complete the poll on the way out. Thank you very much, everybody, and looking forward to seeing you on Friday.
Mr. Lamani, good morning. And there's Afika as well.
Good morning, Mr. Barnes.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
I tell you, I was just having a great time listening to our colleague talking
Yes.
talking us through that. Good one, Bo. It was good.
That's
Really
good.
good.
I
Yes,
see
good.
Mr. Msutu is still here. Perhaps he's got a question that you'd like to share with us, or maybe even a discussion. Oh, he just
He's
left.
gone.
Whack! Yes, it was something you said.
No, I think he left when Morris put his camera on, so it's about his face, man.
Yeah, no, that was about the
No.
timing was close there.
No, well done.
No, that
It went
that
well.
was good. I just didn't see that thing with